At the will, reading my dad declared the penthouse and Tesla go to your brother, not you. I didn't blink. I didn't argue. I just folded my hands in my lap, looked him straight in the eye and said calm as still water. Keep it all. A few people in the room shifted in their seats. Someone near the back let out a quiet, confused laugh like they weren't sure if they'd heard me right. My brother leaned back smiling. Not a cruel smile, not exactly. Just satisfied. Like everything had finally fallen into place the way it was always supposed to. My father nodded once as if my response confirmed something he had believed about me for years. She understands, he said, glancing toward the attorney. She's always been independent. Independent. That was the word he used. Not overlooked, not dismissed, not forgotten. Independent. I could feel the weight of every eye in that room pressing against me, extended family neighbors, 2 of my father's business associates, and a couple of people I didn't even recognize. They were all waiting for something. A reaction. A crack. But I had learned a long time ago how to hold still when everything inside me was shifting. They thought I'd lost my mind. They didn't know I'd already won. My father adjusted his tie, the same small, precise motion he'd made my entire life whenever he felt in control of a situation. He glanced down at the document in front of him, then at the attorney. Well, he said almost casually, that should settle everything. The attorney didn't answer right away. He was an older man, mid-60s, maybe thin, careful with a voice that always sounded like it had something more behind it than what he actually said. He flipped a page. Paused. Then he cleared his throat. Mr. Whitaker, he said, measured and professional, there is an additional document your father left behind. The room changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. My brother's smile faltered just slightly. My father frowned. What do you mean, he asked. The attorney adjusted his glasses. A separate directive. It was filed independently and is to be read after the primary will. There was a silence then. The kind that doesn't come from confusion but from something deeper, something people don't quite understand yet but feel shifting under their feet. I sat there, hands still folded, breathing steady. Because I knew. Or at least I suspected. And for the first time that morning, I allowed myself to remember his voice. You don't need their approval, my grandfather had told me once. Just become someone they can't ignore. I'm 35 years old. A commissioned officer in the United States Navy. I've spent most of my adult life away from this town, away from this house, this table, these conversations that always seemed to circle around things I was never quite part of. My brother stayed. He built a business with my father, expanded it, made it profitable. He was visible. He was present. He was understandable. I wasn't. When I left for the military, my father didn't stop me. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, if that's what you want. And that was it. No pride. No concern. Just quiet acceptance, as if I'd chosen something temporary, something that would eventually pass. It never did. My grandfather was the only one who ever asked me why. Not in a demanding way, not like he was trying to test me. He asked because he wanted to understand. We used to sit on his back porch in the late afternoons when the sun dipped low enough to soften everything. He'd pour 2 glasses of iced tea too sweet for my taste, but I never said anything and we'd talk. You ever notice he said once how people respect what they can see? I nodded. They see your brother's office, his car, his numbers. That makes sense to them. He tapped the side of his glass lightly. But service, that's harder. It doesn't show up in the same way. I remember looking at him then, trying to decide if he was warning me or encouraging me. What if they never see it? I asked. He smiled, not a big smile, just something small and certain. Then you make sure it's worth it anyway. The day I told my family I was enlisting, my brother laughed. Not harshly, just surprised. You, he said, you're serious. My father didn't laugh. He just leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a problem he hadn't quite figured out yet. It's a hard life, he said. I know. You'll be gone most of the time. I know. He nodded once. Then he looked past me toward the window. Well, he said, it's your decision. That was the moment I understood something I didn't have words for yet. I wasn't stepping away from them. I had never really been standing where they were to begin with. My grandfather drove me to the recruiter's office. He didn't say much on the way, just kept both hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward. When we pulled into the parking lot, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an old watch. It wasn't expensive, you could tell that just by looking at it. But it was clean, maintained, cared for. "This was mine," he said. "Wore it for 30 years. I hesitated. "I can't take that." He pressed it into my hand anyway. "You're not taking it," he said. "You're carrying it." I looked down at it, then back at him. "Why me?" He held my gaze for a moment. "Because you understand the difference." Years passed. Deployments came and went. Promotions, 2 quiet ones earned the long way. I missed holidays, birthdays, dinners that from what I heard later weren't much different without me. I sent money home sometimes, not because they asked, just because it felt like something you do for family. No one ever mentioned it. My father would talk about my brother's latest expansion, his new clients, his plans. When he spoke about me, it was usually brief. "She's doing fine," he'd say. Fine. The last time I spoke to my grandfather, I was standing outside a base in Virginia, the wind cutting sharp across the pavement. He sounded tired. But clear. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm good," I said, "just busy." He chuckled softly. "Busy's a good thing." There was a pause. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I'm proud of you." I closed my eyes for a second. "Thank you," I said. We talked a little longer, nothing important, just small things. When the call ended, I told myself I'd call him back in a few days. I didn't. By the time I did, it was too late. I didn't make it home for his funeral. Duty didn't allow it. That's the phrase they use. As if it explains everything. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. A week later, I received a letter. Handwritten. Short. "Stand tall, even when no one's watching." That was all it said. No signature. It didn't need one. Now I was sitting in that same town again. In a room full of people who had never quite known what to do with me. Listening to my father distribute everything he believed mattered. And realizing he hadn't changed. Not really. But maybe he was about to. Because the attorney was still holding that second document. And for the first time in a very long time, my father looked uncertain. I didn't move when the attorney lifted the second document. For a moment, no one did. It was a strange kind of stillness, like the air had shifted but hadn't quite settled yet. My father's hand rested flat against the table, fingers spread just slightly as if grounding himself in something solid. "What is that?" he asked. His voice wasn't sharp, it wasn't demanding. It was unfamiliar. The attorney glanced down, then back up. "This," he said carefully, "is a separate directive filed by your father, Mr. Whitaker. It is to be read in full without interruption." My brother let out a quiet breath through his nose, almost amused again, trying to recover that earlier confidence. "Well," he said lightly, "I guess Grandpa had one more thing to say." No one laughed this time. I kept my eyes on the attorney's hands. The way he handled the paper, slow, deliberate, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an afterthought. This mattered. My grandfather never rushed anything. Not conversations, not decisions, not even silence. Especially not silence. He used to say that silence was where people showed you who they really were when they weren't trying to fill the space. We spent a lot of those silences together. On his porch, in his truck, sitting side by side watching the world move without feeling the need to explain it. "You ever notice," he said once, "how most people talk so they won't have to think?" I smiled. "You talk less than anyone I know." "That's because I already did my thinking," he said. He was a quiet man. Worked with his hands most of his life, fixed things, built things, took care of what was his without making a show of it. When I was a kid, I thought that meant he didn't have much. It took me years to realize he had more than anyone else in that family. He just didn't measure it the same way. The attorney unfolded the paper. "Before I begin," he said, "I need to clarify that this directive establishes a trust and outlines specific responsibilities assigned by the decedent." My father straightened. "A trust," he repeated. "Yes, sir." My brother leaned forward slightly, now interest replacing ease. "What kind of trust?" he asked. The attorney didn't answer right away. Instead, he began to read. "I, Thomas Whitaker, being of sound mind." The words were formal, legal, structured. But beneath them, if you knew how to listen, there was something else. Something human. I remembered the first time my grandfather showed me how to fix a broken hinge. I must have been 10. He didn't take the tool from my hand when I struggled, didn't step in when I got frustrated. He just stood there beside me. "You'll get it," he said. "I'm doing it wrong," I snapped. He shook his head. "You're doing it your way, that's different." I tried again. Slower this time. When it finally worked, I looked up at him waiting. He nodded once. That's it. No applause, no big reaction. Just recognition. And somehow, that meant more. This trust is to be named the Whitaker Service Fund. There was a small shift in the room. Not loud, not dramatic, but noticeable. My brother's brow furrowed. My father's expression tightened. Its purpose shall be to provide financial assistance and support to veterans and their families. Someone near the back whispered something under their breath. I didn't turn to see who. With an emphasis on those who have served without recognition or adequate support upon return to civilian life. My throat tightened slightly. Not from surprise. From understanding. He never talked about his own service. Not really. I knew he'd served, knew he'd seen things he didn't share. But he never wore it like a badge. He carried it like something private. Something earned but not displayed. The management and full discretionary control of this trust shall be granted to my granddaughter. The attorney paused. Just for a second. Then he looked up. Emily Whitaker. Every head in the room turned. I didn't move. Didn't react. But I could feel it, that shift. The one I'd felt my whole life just reversed. My brother blinked. Wait, he said. What? My father didn't speak. He was looking at me now. Really looking? For the first time in a long time. This decision is made with full confidence in her judgment, character, and understanding of service. The attorney continued, his voice steady. Qualities which I have observed consistently throughout her life. I closed my eyes briefly. Just for a second. Because I could hear it. Not the attorney's voice. His. You don't need them to understand, my grandfather had told me once. We were sitting in his truck that day, rain tapping softly against the windshield. You just need to understand yourself. What if that's not enough, I asked. He looked at me calm as ever. It will be, he said, eventually. Along with the trust, I leave a personal letter to be read aloud at this time. The attorney lowered the document slightly, then reached for a second page. My father shifted in his seat. This is unnecessary, he said quietly. The attorney didn't respond. He just began to read. If you are hearing this, then I am gone. And if I know this family the way I believe I do, then there is already a misunderstanding in the room. A few people exchanged glances. My brother leaned back again, but there was no smile now. I have watched each of you build your lives in your own way. Some of you have built with numbers, some with presence, and one of you, the attorney paused briefly, has built with sacrifice. The room was silent. Completely silent. Emily, he read, you chose a path that does not always come with recognition. That is the nature of it. I felt something shift in my chest. Not pain. Not quite. Something older. Deeper. Your family may not always understand what you have given, not because they do not care, but because they measure differently. My father's jaw tightened. I am leaving you this responsibility not as a burden, but as acknowledgement. The word hung there. Acknowledgement. You have already proven that you do not need more to carry. What you deserve. A pause. Is to be seen. The attorney lowered the paper. No one spoke. No one moved. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Just like before. But something had changed. Not in the room. Not yet. But in the way they were looking at me. My brother exhaled slowly. So, what she gets a charity, he said, trying to make sense of it. The attorney answered calmly. She receives full control of a funded trust with significant assets. That landed differently. My father finally spoke. How significant, he asked. The attorney met his eyes. Enough to matter. Silence again. But this time it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of something none of them had expected to face. I looked down at my hands. Then at the old watch on my wrist. Still ticking. Still steady. Just like he always was. And for the first time since I walked into that room, I realized something clearly. I hadn't just been given something. I had been recognized. The room didn't recover right away. It just sat there with what had been said. You could feel it settling into people differently, some trying to understand it, some trying to measure it, and a few trying to decide whether it mattered at all. My father was still looking at me. Not with anger, not even with disappointment. With something quieter. Something that didn't have a name yet. The attorney gathered the pages, aligning the edges carefully as if the order of things still mattered. If there are no further questions, he said, we can proceed with the formal transfer process in the coming weeks. My brother leaned forward. I have a question, he said. Of course he did. How is this funded, he asked. I mean, where is the money coming from? The attorney met his gaze without hesitation. Your grandfather allocated a portion of his private holdings to establish the trust, he said. Investments, land interests, and several long-term accounts. My brother blinked. That's not possible, he said. We went over everything. You reviewed the primary estate, the attorney replied. This was structured separately. I could see it then, the moment my brother realized something had existed in that family that he hadn't been part of. Not excluded. Just never invited into. We left the house in small groups. People always do that after something uncomfortable. They don't leave all at once. They break apart quietly like a gathering that no longer knows what it's supposed to be. A few relatives stopped me on the way out. Congratulations, one of them said, though it didn't quite sound like congratulations. That's something, another added, unsure of the word. I nodded politely. Thank you. That was enough. It always had been. The air outside felt different. Cooler, cleaner. I stood on the front steps for a moment, letting it settle. This house had never quite felt like mine. Even growing up, it had always belonged more to the idea of a family than to the people inside it. My brother's voice came from behind me. So he said. I turned. He had his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly tense. That was unexpected, he added. It was, I said. He studied me for a second. You knew, he asked. I shook my head. Number. He frowned. But you didn't seem surprised. I considered that. I wasn't, I said. He looked away down the driveway. I don't get it, he said. Why you? There was no accusation in it. Just confusion. I could have given him an answer. Explained the years, the distance, the choices. But none of that would have made sense to him, not in the way he needed it to. So I just said you'd have to ask him. My brother let out a quiet breath. Yeah, he said. Guess I can't do that anymore. My father didn't come outside right away. I didn't expect him to. He was the kind of man who needed time not to feel something, but to understand what it meant. I walked down the steps and toward the driveway. My car was parked along the curb, same place it had been when I arrived that morning. Nothing about it had changed. And yet everything had. The drive back took me past the old roads I used to know by heart. The grocery store on the corner, the gas station where my grandfather used to stop every Friday. The small park where nothing ever seemed to happen but where everything felt remembered. I pulled over once. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. The watch on my wrist caught the light as I turned the steering wheel. Still ticking. Still steady. The first time I wore that watch on base, one of the younger officers noticed it. Nice piece, he said. Where'd you get it? My grandfather, I told him. He nodded, impressed. Looks old. It is. He smiled. Still works, though. I looked down at it. Yeah, I said, it does. Military life isn't what most people think it is. It's not constant action. It's not glory. It's routine. Responsibility. Long stretches of quiet work that no one ever hears about. You wake up early, you follow orders, you lead when it's your turn, you take care of the people under you. And you learn over time that recognition isn't part of the job description. That's not why you do it. But there are moments, small ones, when someone looks at you, not for what you rank, not for what you've done on paper, but for how you carry yourself. Those moments stay with you. They build something, not visible, but real. I remember one deployment where things didn't go the way they were supposed to. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone would write about. Just a situation that required someone to stay steady when others couldn't. After it was over, one of the enlisted men came up to me. Ma'am, he said, thank you. For what I asked. He shrugged. For not making it worse. I almost laughed. But I didn't. Because I understood what he meant. Sometimes doing your job well means not adding to the problem. Sometimes that's enough. My family never saw those moments. They didn't see the long hours, the quiet decisions, the responsibility that didn't come with applause. They saw absence, distance, a life they couldn't measure. I didn't blame them. Not really. You can't expect someone to value what they don't understand. But my grandfather did. He didn't need to see everything. He just needed to know who I was. I drove a little farther before pulling into a small parking lot near the edge of town. There was a bench there overlooking a stretch of open field that hadn't changed in years. I sat down. For the first time that day, I let myself exhale fully. The trust. The letter. The way the room had shifted. It wasn't about winning. Not in the way they thought. I hadn't taken anything from them. I hadn't proven them wrong. Not directly. But something had changed. Something quiet. Something that couldn't be undone. I took the letter out of my bag. The one the attorney had handed me after everything ended. I hadn't read it again yet. Not properly. I unfolded it carefully. The paper felt different in my hands than it had in that room. More personal. More real. Emily, it began. No formal tone this time. Just my name. You may not realize it yet, but the life you chose has already shaped more people than you will ever meet. I paused there. Let it settle. There will be times when it feels like no one is watching, like what you do doesn't reach beyond the moment. I looked out across the field. The wind moved through the grass in slow, steady waves. But impact is not always visible, and recognition is not always immediate. I swallowed. What matters is that you continue anyway. I folded the letter slowly, held it for a moment, then placed it back in my bag. The sun was starting to lower, casting long shadows across the ground. I stood up, took one last look at the field, then walked back to my car, because whatever came next, it wasn't about what I had been given. It was about what I was going to do with it. I didn't go back to the house that evening. There wasn't anything there I needed. Not anymore. Instead, I checked into a small hotel just off the highway, the kind with faded carpet, quiet hallways, and a front desk clerk who barely looked up when you walked in. It was the same place I'd stayed a few times over the years when visits home didn't quite feel like coming home. Some things don't change. And sometimes that's a relief. I set my bag down on the chair by the window. The room smelled faintly of old air conditioning and detergent. Outside, the sky was turning that soft gray blue that comes just before night settles in. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, still in my uniform hands resting on my knees. The silence didn't feel heavy. Just honest. There's a kind of quiet you learn to live with in the military. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of distraction. You learn to sit with your thoughts. You learn not to run from them. And eventually you learn which ones matter. That night only one thought stayed. Not about the trust. Not about the will. But about something my father had said years ago, something I hadn't thought about in a long time. You don't need anything from us. At the time I had taken it as dismissal. A quiet way of saying I wasn't part of what they were building. But now sitting there alone I realized something different. He hadn't meant to push me away. He had simply placed me somewhere else. Somewhere he didn't know how to reach. The next morning I woke early. Old habits don't fade. I got dressed, checked out, and drove back toward town, not to the house, but to the one place that had always made sense to me. My grandfather's. It was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing it clearly for the first time. The paint had faded along the edges of the porch. The railing leaned slightly where it always had. The yard was still neat, though someone had been taking care of it. I parked along the side and walked up the steps. They creaked in the same places. I noticed that. I always noticed things like that. The front door was locked. Of course it was. But I didn't try to open it. I just stood there for a moment looking at it. Remembering. He used to leave it unlocked during the day. Said there was no reason to keep people out if you weren't afraid of anything inside. I never knew if that was wisdom or just the way he chose to live. Maybe both. I walked around to the back. The porch was still there, same 2 chairs, same small table between them. One of the chairs had a slight tilt to it, the one he always sat in. I stepped onto the porch and sat down. The wood creaked under my weight. For a second it felt like nothing had changed. I figured you'd come here. I turned. My father stood at the edge of the yard. Hands at his sides, no jacket, no tie. Just him. I wasn't sure if you would, I said. He nodded once. I wasn't sure either. He took a few steps closer, then stopped, not quite ready to come all the way up. We stood there like that for a moment. The distance between us wasn't large, but it felt familiar. I didn't know about the trust, he said. I know. He looked at the porch, then at me. He never mentioned it. I nodded. He didn't mention a lot of things. My father exhaled slowly. That's not how I do things. No, I said, it's not. He stepped closer this time. 1 foot on the first step, but no further. I thought I understood him, he said. I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure what that would sound like. I thought I understood you too, he added. That got my attention. I looked at him. Really looked. There was something different in his expression now. Not certainty. Not control. Something closer to doubt. I didn't think you needed anything, he said. There it was again. That same sentence. But it didn't sound the same anymore. I didn't, I said. He frowned slightly. Then why does this feel like I missed something? I held his gaze. Because you did. He didn't react right away. Didn't defend himself. Didn't argue. He just stood there letting that settle. I gave your brother what I thought mattered, he said after a moment. I know. And you, he paused, you chose something else. Yes. He nodded slowly. I thought that meant you were separate from all this. I glanced around the yard. The house. The porch. This was never really mine, I said. He looked at me confused. It was your home. It was your home, I corrected gently. And his. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. My father stepped up onto the porch, then finally closing the distance. He didn't sit. Just stood beside me, looking out at the yard the same way I was. I didn't know how to measure what you were doing, he admitted. That felt closer to the truth. You weren't supposed to, I said. He turned slightly. Then what was I supposed to do? I thought about that. Not quickly. Not easily. Ask, I said. He looked away. Toward the fence line. Toward the place where the yard met the open field beyond it. I thought giving you space was respect, he said. It can be, I replied. But not when it replaces understanding. He was quiet again. Longer this time. I watched your brother build something I could see, he said. And I watched you leave. I nodded. That's what it looked like. He let out a breath. But I never asked where you were going. That was it. That was the moment. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just clear. I didn't need more from you, I said after a while. He looked at me again. Then what did you need? I met his eyes. Not angry. Not hurt. Just honest. To be seen. The words stayed between us. Not heavy, but real. My father didn't answer right away. He just nodded. Once. Slowly. I see you now, he said. I didn't respond. Because that kind of thing, it doesn't come from words. It comes from what happens next. The wind moved through the yard again, brushing against the porch, carrying that same quiet I had always known here. My father looked around one more time. Then back at me. What are you going to do with it? He asked. I followed his gaze out toward the field. Toward something bigger than this house. This town. This moment. I'm going to use it, I said. And for the first time since I'd come back, that answer felt like mine. The paperwork began the following Monday. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a series of meetings, signatures, quiet conversations, the kind of work that builds something real without ever drawing attention to itself. I stayed in town longer than I'd planned. Not because I had to, but because this mattered. The attorney's office was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, old framed certificates, a desk that looked like it had held decades of decisions that didn't need to be explained to anyone else. He greeted me with a firm handshake. Ms. Whitaker, he said, I'm glad you came in. So am I replied. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Let's talk about what your grandfather left you. He didn't rush. That was the first thing I noticed. He explained everything carefully, how the trust had been built, where the funds were held, how the structure worked. It wasn't just a single account. It was layered, planned, intentional. Your grandfather began this nearly 10 years ago, he said. I looked up. Then he nodded. Small at first, then consistent. He added to it regularly. I sat back slightly. 10 years. That meant he had started this long before his health declined, long before anyone thought about wills or estates. He had been building this quietly, while the rest of us were living our lives unaware. He never mentioned it, I said. The attorney smiled faintly. That seems consistent with what I knew of him. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents, detailed records, investment summaries, notes. But what caught my attention wasn't the numbers. It was the purpose. This isn't just a financial structure, he said. It's a mission. I nodded. I understand that. He studied me for a moment. I believe you do, he said. There were conditions, of course. Not restrictive ones. Guiding ones. The fund was designed to support veterans transitioning back into civilian life, especially those who didn't have strong family support. Housing assistance, job training, emergency support. Nothing excessive. Nothing showy. Just practical help. The kind that actually makes a difference. He was very clear about one thing, the attorney added. What's that? I asked. That this fund should never become performative. I almost smiled. That sounds like him. The meetings continued throughout the week. Account managers, advisors, a small board that had been quietly assembled. People who had known my grandfather in different ways, some from his past, some from his later years. All of them steady. No one treated me like an outsider. No one questioned why I was there. They simply included me. On Wednesday, we visited one of the properties tied to the trust. A modest building on the edge of town. Nothing impressive from the outside. But inside, it was already being used. A small group of veterans sat in a common room talking quietly. Coffee on the table, papers spread out. One of them looked up as we entered. Ma'am, he said, nodding. I nodded back. Morning. The attorney spoke with the coordinator, giving me space to observe. I noticed things. The way people sat. The way they held themselves. The small, almost invisible tension that comes from adjusting to a life that doesn't move the same way anymore. I recognized it, because I had felt it. One of the men stood up and walked over. Mid-40s maybe, worn but not broken. You new here, he asked? I shook my head. Not exactly. He nodded like that made sense. Place helps, he said after a moment. How so, I asked. He shrugged. Gives you somewhere to land. Somewhere to land. I repeated that in my head. Because that was exactly what this was. Not a solution. Not a fix. Just a place to start again. Later that afternoon, the attorney handed me a set of finalized documents. This will formally transfer operational control to you, he said. I took them. Felt the weight of them. Not heavy. But significant. Are you ready for this? He asked. I looked at the pages. Then at him. I've been ready for a long time, I said. He nodded. I believe that. The signing itself was quiet. No audience. No announcement. Just a pen. A name. And a responsibility that had been waiting for me long before I knew it existed. When it was done, I sat there for a moment. Not moving. Not thinking. Just present. You understand, the attorney said gently, that this isn't something you complete. It's something you continue. I nodded. I know. He stood extending his hand. Then I think your grandfather chose well. That evening I drove back to the house. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. My father was in the living room when I walked in. No TV on. No papers in his hands. Just sitting there. You're still in town, he said. I am. He nodded. We didn't talk right away. Didn't need to. How did it go? He asked after a while. Good, I said. That's good. He looked at me then. Not quickly. Not casually. But with intention. What exactly is it? He asked. I thought about how to answer that. Not in terms he would expect, but in terms he could understand. It's support, I said. For people who don't always have it. He nodded slowly. And you're in charge of that now. Yes. Another pause. That's a lot of responsibility, he said. It is. He leaned back slightly, studying me again. But this time, there was no confusion. Your grandfather always believed in things I didn't fully understand, he said. I didn't respond. I just let him continue. I thought I was building something solid, he said. You were. He shook his head slightly. But I think he was building something lasting. That stayed with me. Because there's a difference between something that holds value and something that carries meaning. I think you're right, I said. He looked at me again, then nodded. And for the first time, there was no distance in it. The first real decision didn't come with a meeting. It came with a phone call. Late Thursday afternoon. I was still in town going over final notes with the coordinator from the center we'd visited earlier in the week. My phone rang. Unknown number. I stepped outside to take it. This is Whitaker, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Not hesitation, just someone deciding how to begin. Ma'am, a voice said, my name's Daniel Ruiz. I was given your number through the fund. I leaned slightly against the railing. Yes, Mr. Ruiz, how can I help? Another pause. I'm not sure, he said honestly. I was told, you might be able to point me in the right direction. That more than anything told me exactly where he was. We talked for about 15 minutes. He didn't tell me everything. People rarely do on the first call. But he told me enough. Former Army. Recently discharged. No steady housing. A job lined up, but it didn't start for another 3 weeks. He wasn't asking for much. Just time. I've got a place I can stay for a couple nights, he said. After that, I'm not sure. I looked out across the parking lot. Thought about the building we'd visited. The empty room I'd noticed near the back. You're in town, I asked. Yes, ma'am. Come by tomorrow morning, I said. 9 o'clock. Another pause. Are you sure, he asked? Yes. His voice softened slightly. Thank you. After the call ended, I stayed where I was for a moment. Not thinking about policy. Not thinking about structure. Just thinking about him. This was what my grandfather had built. Not a concept. Not an idea. A place where someone could call and not be turned away. The next morning I arrived early. Old habit. I walked through the building checking things not because I didn't trust the people there, but because I needed to understand how it felt when it was quiet. When it wasn't performing for anyone. Daniel arrived at 8:57. I noticed that. Clean clothes, worn boots, carried himself straight but with that same quiet tension I'd seen before. He hesitated slightly at the door. I walked over. Mr. Ruiz. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. Come on in. We sat down at a small table near the window. No paperwork yet. No forms. Just conversation. Tell me what you need, I said. He took a breath. Just somewhere to stay, he said. A couple weeks. I've got a job starting soon. I just need to get there. I nodded. You will. He looked at me unsure. You don't know that, he said. I met his gaze. Yes, I said, I do. We got him set up in less than an hour. Temporary housing, access to meals, a small stipend to bridge the gap. Nothing excessive. Everything necessary. As he was leaving the office, he paused. Turned back. I appreciate this, he said. You don't owe us anything, I replied. He shook his head slightly. Still, he said, it matters. After he left, I stood by the window for a while, watching him walk across the lot. Shoulders a little lighter. Steps a little more certain. That was the moment it became real. Not the signing. Not the documents. This. Later that afternoon, my brother called. I hadn't expected that. I answered anyway. Hey, he said. Hey. A pause. I've been thinking, he added. I figured. He let out a small breath. About everything, the will, the trust, all of it. I didn't interrupt. I didn't realize how much he had set aside, he said. He planned ahead, I replied. Yeah, he said, he did. Another pause. I got the penthouse, he said finally. And the Tesla. Yes. It's a lot, he said. It is. But it doesn't feel the way I thought it would. I didn't answer right away. Because I knew that feeling. What does it feel like? I asked. He hesitated. Like I got what I wanted, he said. But not what he meant. That was honest. More honest than I expected. He didn't choose against you, I said. I know, he replied quickly. I think I know. He chose based on what he believed each of us needed, I added. There was a long silence on the line. I don't know if I needed this, my brother said. You might, I said. Or you might learn something from it. He gave a quiet laugh. That sounds like something he would have said. It does, I agreed. Another pause. Then, what you're doing with that fund, he said, that's different. It is. I went by the building yesterday, he admitted. I raised an eyebrow slightly. You did? Yeah, I didn't go in, just looked. And I asked. I didn't understand it, he said. But I could tell it mattered. That was enough. You're welcome to come by, I said. He didn't answer right away. Maybe I will, he said finally. When the call ended, I set the phone down slowly. Things don't change all at once. Not people. Not families. But sometimes they start. That evening, I sat down at my desk in the small office at the center. The same one my grandfather had used. Simple, clean, functional. I opened a new folder. Labeled it. Not with my name. With the funds. Because this wasn't about me. Not really. It was about continuing something that had already begun. And for the first time, I understood what winning actually meant. The first letter came 3 weeks later. Not an official report, not a document. Just a handwritten note folded neatly and left on my desk. I recognized the handwriting before I even opened it. Danielle Ruiz? Ma'am. I started the job this week. It's nothing fancy, warehouse work, early hours. But it's steady. I just wanted to say, thank you. Not just for the place to stay. For not making me feel like I had to explain everything. That mattered more than I expected. Ruiz. I read it twice. Then I set it down gently. Not because it was fragile, but because it meant something. People don't always remember what you give them, but they remember how you make them feel while they're receiving it. My grandfather understood that. He never gave in a way that made you feel small. He gave in a way that made you feel steady. By the end of the month, we had helped 7 more. Not dramatic cases, not headlines. Just people in between chapters. A place to land. Time to reset. A quiet hand forward. Word spread the way things like that always do. Slowly. Through conversations. Through trust. One afternoon, a local reporter stopped by. Young, polite, curious. I heard about the fund, she said. Would you be willing to talk about it? I considered that. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew what my grandfather would have said. Keep it about the people it helps, I replied. She nodded. That's what I was hoping you'd say. The article ran the following Sunday. Simple. Respectful. Focused. It mentioned the fund, the purpose, a few anonymous stories. And at the end, my name. I didn't think much of it. Until my father called. I saw the paper, he said. Yeah. Yes. A pause. They used your name. They did. Another pause. I didn't know you were doing all of that, he said. I leaned back slightly in my chair. That's kind of the point, I said. He didn't answer right away. I showed it to a few people, he said. That caught my attention. You did? Yes. Another pause. I told them, you were my daughter. The words landed quietly. But they stayed. That's the first time you've said it like that, I said. I know, he replied. There was no defense in his voice. No justification. Just acknowledgement. I should have said it sooner, he added. I looked down at the desk. At the letter still resting there. You can say it now, I said. He exhaled softly. I'm proud of you, he said. The room didn't change. Nothing around me shifted. But something inside me did. Not sharply. Not dramatically. Just settled. Thank you, I said. We stayed on the line for a moment longer. Not talking. Just there. When the call ended, I sat there quietly. The same way I had so many times before. But this time the silence felt different. Not like something missing. Like something complete. A few days later, my brother showed up. No announcement. No call ahead. Just walked through the door of the center looking slightly out of place. I figured I'd come see it, he said. I nodded. Good. He walked slowly through the space, taking it in. The chairs, the desks, the people. This is what you do now, he asked. This is part of it, I said. He nodded. I always thought success looked different, he admitted. It usually does, I said. We stopped near the window, the same one I had stood by weeks earlier. I used to think you left, he said. I glanced at him. I didn't leave, I said. I just went somewhere you weren't looking. He let out a quiet breath. Yeah, he said. I see that now. We stood there for a while. Not fixing anything? Not rewriting the past. Just understanding it better. That evening after everyone had gone, I stayed behind. The building was quiet again, the way I preferred it. I sat at the desk, opened my grandfather's letter one more time. Recognition is not always immediate. I smiled slightly. No, I said quietly. It isn't. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back where it belonged. Then I looked around the room, at what had been built, at what was continuing. Some people leave money. Some leave property. Some leave things that can be counted, measured, divided. But some leave direction, a way forward. And sometimes, that's the only inheritance that truly lasts. If this story reminded you of someone who quietly carried more than anyone ever noticed, take a moment. Reach out. Tell them you see them. Because sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything.